So let's get started with the basics of file management in Figma. Now, a bit of a premise, this is going to come from the experience of a designer with over a decade of experience, and I worked on all sorts of projects, from small projects for startups all the way to projects for Fortune 500 companies and large enterprise companies. So let's start with one single element which is important to consider at all times. And that is that there isn't a single solution when it comes to file management and project management in Figma. So you're always going to have to think through what are the clients or the company's specific goals and needs before you actually go ahead and structure a file, a team, or just the overall workflow. So it's going to depend if you're working on a startup project or if you're working on an enterprise level solution. It's also going to depend and change if you're working as a solo designer on a file, or if there is a team involved, which you have to sync in and have a high level of consistency between each other's workflow and when it comes to the brand identity that you're conveying with the projects. So my recommendation would be to start simple, because you can always evolve, you can always improve and adapt a project. But by starting in a simple way, especially if the project that you're working on is for a startup, or maybe it's a freelance project for a new client that has some needs which are more short term, you're going to be able to avoid unnecessary clutter in your workspace, and you essentially don't even have a need unless there is a specific one at that moment to start with complexity, because complexity is simply going to be the addition of solving simple problems which are then going to adopt and create a more complex system. But a complex system is needed just in order to simplify complexity when there's a lot of variables. When there aren't a lot of variables, you can simply go ahead and create a simple design system, a simple file management solution. So don't be overwhelmed when it comes to the management and structuring right away. So let's get into some live examples. Let's start with teams. And again, there isn't a one single solution which is going to work for each and every client. You're going to have to make your shots, and you're going to have to essentially create a solution which is tailor-made for your company or your team specific needs. So this could be a good idea to start structuring a Teams project in Figma. The first area would be the working files, and these are going to be the files that you're going to utilize for working on your day-to-day, such as web design files, or maybe you're working on a web app or some marketing material. So these are going to be the files that you're actively going to work on for the very most part of your day. Then secondarily, it would be good to nest and create a specific folder area for the design systems, because it's going to be helpful to create this division between the design system and the working file, especially as a project grows and you're going to have to tackle more complexity. So this is going to definitely help create a hierarchy when it comes to the file management and organization. The file systems, as we're going to see in just a moment, can be even divided into multiple files to make the process even easier. And the third area, which I recommend you to consider, is a resources and inspiration area. Sometimes as designers, we are going to download UI kits from third-party sources or even from a Figma community. And it's useful to keep all of these files that we are taking inspiration or maybe some resources all organized in an area which is going to serve as a version control for all of the files that we used in order to gather inspiration or some assets for the working files. On top of that, in some companies, you want to consider having completed and live files that have already been implemented in development. So you might have something like approved and then working files, design systems, resources and inspiration, and so on. And then of course, there's going to be company-specific folders that you might want to consider to add as well. So see this as an inspiration for a initial structure, which can work really well for the majority of companies, especially as you're scaling out. But again, you don't necessarily need to structure all of this up, or you don't even need a team if you're working on a shorter term project, especially at the beginning. Now let's move on to Figma files organization. Now when it comes to the organization, it's again going to depend based on the client's specific needs. But when it comes to the working files, my recommendation would be from a high level to divide whenever the project is at a level of complexity where it's difficult, especially to keep everything in one single Figma file, to divide these files into different files and really think through what are going to be the use cases and what makes more sense. Usually it's going to be a file, for example, for the website, another file for UI, UX apps. So if your company, for example, have a web app, there will be a file dedicated exclusively to that. And then also one for miscellaneous marketing or graphic design materials, which can be useful for having this extra layer of division. Then when it comes to the design systems, I found a lot of success in dividing the foundational elements of the design system in one single file, and then the components in another one. And this is especially true whenever you're starting to add many components and you're literally creating a UI kit around that company's specific components. So foundational elements are going to be things like colors, typography, layout grids, and even things like drop shadows, icons, and other components which are going to be foundations of the design system. While the components are going to be things like input fields, buttons, nested components, which are going to create up more complex UIs. And this is especially true in web apps and more complex apps. So you can have this division. And again, I added these rectangles here to symbolize that you can have multiple files whenever the project requires it. You can create nested versions of a main file as well. So keep that in mind whenever you're working on the file organization overall. Now the next part is going to be the actual Figma file structure, and we're specifically talking about pages. Now when it comes to the file structure, again, there's so many ways that you can tackle a structure of a file, but I would usually go with one of two approaches, which is either the basic format. If, for example, you're creating a short-term project, you might want to consider having all of the items, all of the elements that we discussed just a moment ago in one single file. So you don't even need to create a theme with all of the nested elements. So for example, if I'm working with a startup for 2 to 3 months and we just need a limited amount of screens for the main app launch, and maybe we need a landing page, and this is going to be the website. And I want to still have everything synced up within a basic design system, but nothing too complex. And also having some of the assets and inspiration elements that I worked on. I might include everything in one single file. That's totally fine. And the beauty about this is that if you sync it up correctly, you can then divide this into multiple files with ease. If the project grows, maybe they get a round of funding and there's a big vision and there's going to be new designers coming in, I can easily divide up the design system page into a dedicated file like we've seen just a moment ago. I can use the website pages and create a dedicated website file. And the same is true also for the web app and the assets. So you can see how you can start small with a solution like this and then expand with time. And then the second one is going to be a more advanced layout, which is going to be much more project dependent. And this is just a short example. You can see I can have, for example, the section title on the top, and below that I could have individual pages for the different screens of the website. So this is going to be inside of a website file. So only website related items are going to be here. So again, as you can see, there's not one single way of doing things. There's multiple, and it's going to depend based on your specific judgment. When we analyze all of the tools that we learned about in previous videos, such as components, auto layout, libraries, color styles, instances, text styles, these are all tools that can help create a perfect harmony and act almost as a glue between the file structure and workflow, and create a connection point between all of these elements that we just discussed. But they don't essentially create that level of harmony by themselves. It's almost like creating a recipe. You're in the kitchen and there's different ingredients, and you need to mix them well for achieving a specific result. But there isn't one single recipe that is going to be the absolute best and the end all be all. I want to leave you with some really useful resources, especially for design system, and to learn some of these concepts of structure from the greats, the big companies out there. And the first one is Design Systems for Figma.com, which is an amazing resource to learn and see design systems of large enterprise companies. You can literally copy them inside of the Figma profile that you have, and you can analyze and learn about the structure of these big companies. So it's definitely a resource that I highly recommend you to check out, as well as the Figma community, because there's a lot of gems in there. So keep working and thinking about what is going to be the best structure for your specific project, your specific client. Maybe take out a pen and paper, start brainstorming some ideas, and only after that start structuring it, and you're going to find much more success than blindly following rules that are not going to be specific for your clients or your company's specific needs.